Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the opinions you defend most passionately were never truly born from your own reflection, that the convictions you claim as your own were planted there by forces you never questioned, nurtured by repetition until they felt like home. Imagine discovering that your thoughts, the very things you believe make you an individual, are indistinguishable from the thoughts of millions of others around you. Not because you converged on truth together, but because you are all shaped by the same invisible machinery, speaking the same phrases, consuming the same narratives, believing the same manufactured certainties. This is not paranoia. This is not conspiracy theory. This is the silent, accepted reality of modern consciousness. Today, we will explore one of the most profound and dangerous questions of our time. Why doesn't modern society think critically anymore? And to do that, we will dive into the brilliant allegory written by George Orwell, Animal Farm. A story that reveals not just the corruption of power, but the gradual death of independent thought. Stay with me until the end, because the last insight we'll uncover is the most powerful one of all. One that might change how you see the world forever. Before we begin, if you're passionate about exploring the hidden truths of the human mind, philosophy, and the patterns of society, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share your thoughts in the comments. This journey is designed not just to inform you, but to awaken something deep inside you, your ability to see through illusion. Because in a world that rewards conformity, critical thinking has become an act of rebellion. We live in an age of unprecedented access to information, yet we have never been more intellectually uniform. We carry libraries in our pockets and scrolls through headlines without comprehension. We comment on complex political systems we've never studied, share moral outrage about events we've barely understood, and defend ideologies we've never truly examined. We have mistaken speed for understanding, volume for depth, and the illusion of knowledge for actual thinking. But here is the paradox that should unsettle you. We are told constantly that we live in the age of critical thinking. Universities celebrate it. Corporations brand themselves around it. Social media promises it, urging us to think different. Question everything. Be yourself. Yet look around. Look at the uniformity of our outrage. Look at the predictability of our arguments. Look at how quickly we abandon nuance for tribalism. How eagerly we defend positions we barely understand. How desperately we seek confirmation rather than truth. We have built a civilization that worships the idea of critical thinking while systematically destroying the conditions necessary for it to exist. And the most disturbing part? We do not even realize it is happening. This is the territory George Orwell mapped decades ago, not in his political warnings, but in his psychological prophecies. Animal Farm is not a story about politics. It is a story about the death of independent thought. It documents, with surgical precision, how a society voluntarily surrenders its capacity to think, how language becomes corrupted until truth itself becomes meaningless, how freedom is abandoned not through resistance, but through comfort. The animals on that farm did not lose their ability to think overnight. They lost it gradually, through small distortions, justified accommodations, and the profound human need to belong. And they were not alone in this tragedy. They were us. So we arrive at the great question, the one that will haunt this entire journey. Why has a species capable of landing on the moon, splitting atoms, and creating artificial consciousness lost the ability to think for itself? Why do we collectively surrender our minds to systems, ideologies, and narratives that serve interests other than our own? Why do we mistake obedience for understanding, conformity for clarity, and the whispers of the crowd for the voice of truth? The answer is not what you think it is. It is not stupidity. It is not laziness, though both play a role. The answer is far more insidious, far more human, far more tragic. It lies in the architecture of our psychology, in the structures of our societies, and in the fundamental human hunger for belonging that runs deeper than our hunger for truth. To understand this fully, we must descend into the very mechanisms that make us vulnerable. We must understand how fear operates in the modern mind. We must see how our emotions are weaponized. We must trace the invisible threads connecting our individual surrender to our collective enslavement. And we must do all of this without looking away, without retreating into comfortable explanations, without allowing ourselves the luxury of not seeing what is plainly before us. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And that is precisely where the real transformation begins. The question demands an answer. Why are we so willing to surrender our minds? The culprit is not external force. It is something far more intimate, far more devastating. It lives within us. Psychologist Erich Fromm identified this phenomenon decades ago. He called it the escape from freedom. His insight was simple yet terrifying. When freedom becomes too heavy, when the weight of individual responsibility becomes unbearable, people unconsciously surrender it for comfort and order. We do not crave tyranny. We crave relief from the burden of thinking. We trade the dizzying responsibility of choosing truth for the sedative comfort of being told what to believe. Carl Jung deepened this observation. He recognized that society, at its deepest level, prefers to live in collective illusions because individuality demands something people fear, more than oppression itself responsibility. When you think critically, you can no longer blame external forces for your predicament. You become accountable for your beliefs, your choices, your silence. And that accountability is the price of freedom. Most people would rather live in a comfortable lie than face the shattering freedom of truth. But this is only half the story. Orwell understood something that modern psychology is only now confirming. Thought and language are intertwined in ways we barely comprehend. Orwell wrote that if thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought. This is not metaphorical. It is neurological. When the vocabulary available to you shrinks, the thoughts you can think shrink with it. If you eliminate the word freedom, you eliminate the capacity to even conceive of freedom. If you replace truth with narrative, you fundamentally altered human consciousness itself. The animals on the farm experienced this viscerally. The pigs did not need whips. They needed only to rewrite language. Each small modification to the commandments, each subtle linguistic shift created new mental boundaries. The animals could not rebel because they literally could not think in the terms necessary for rebellion. Their prison was not bars, it was vocabulary. And this is precisely what is happening in our world today, though we do not see it because we are too close to the machinery. Ideologies, corporations, and institutions shape our language constantly. New terms emerge. Old meanings fade. What once meant something profound becomes rebranded, reshaped, rendered meaningless through repetition. We celebrate freedom while surrendering autonomy. We champion diversity while enforcing conformity. We speak of truth while accepting convenient narratives. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche warned that convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies themselves. A lie can be challenged. A conviction, once it feels like your identity, becomes impervious to challenge. To question your conviction feels like questioning yourself, and most people would rather defend a comfortable lie than face the dissolution of their identity through honest doubt. This is why propaganda has evolved. It no longer relies on crude deception. Modern propaganda is psychological. It does not tell you what to think. It makes you feel something so intensely that you stop questioning it altogether. The animals in Animal Farm did not obey because they loved lies. They obeyed because they loved the feeling of belonging, of purpose, of being part of something greater than themselves. The more they believed, the more their chains disappeared from their consciousness. That same mechanism operates in our digital age with unprecedented sophistication. Every algorithm, every social media platform, every news outlet is designed to make you feel, not think, to trigger emotion, not reason. Because a mind controlled by emotion is infinitely easier to steer than one guided by reason. And here's the cruelest paradox. The more information we have access to, the less capacity we have to process it critically. We are drowning in data while starving for meaning. We confuse the consumption of information with the possession of knowledge. We mistake sharing an opinion online for engaging in thought. We have built systems that reward speed over accuracy, reaction over reflection, emotional resonance over logical coherence. The hidden problem, then, is not one thing. It is a convergence of psychological vulnerabilities, linguistic manipulation, emotional exploitation, and technological design, all working in perfect synchronization to make independent thought not just difficult, but nearly impossible. We are not trapped by chains we can see. We are trapped by the invisible architecture of our own consciousness, shaped by forces both within and without. The tragedy of intellectual surrender is that it unfolds so gradually, so invisibly, that by the time you recognize it, the damage is already woven into the fabric of your reality. You do not wake up enslaved. You wake up one day and realize you have always been enslaved, and the slavery has simply become so comfortable that freedom feels like an alien concept. Consider what happens when critical thinking dies in a population. The first consequence is predictability. A person who does not think critically becomes a person who can be predicted, managed, and steered. Their reactions become standardized. Their outrage becomes manufactured. Their beliefs become interchangeable with millions of others. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio proved scientifically what we have always suspected intuitively. Emotion is essential for decision-making, but when emotion overwhelms logic, it blinds judgment entirely. Modern systems exploit this ruthlessly. They do not appeal to your reason. They appeal to your fear, your envy, your pride, your tribal instinct. And in that moment of emotional overwhelm, you cease to be a thinking agent. You become a predictable actor in a script written by others. The second consequence is cognitive ossification, the hardening of the mind. The psychologist Carol Dweck demonstrated that when people adopt a fixed mindset, they stop growing. And the ultimate fixed mindset is the belief that you already know. When you stop questioning, you stop learning. When you stop learning, your mind begins to age rapidly, regardless of your chronological years. You become calcified, rigid, unable to adapt to new information or perspectives. The animals on the farm experience this. They stop questioning. And within that cessation of questioning, they forgot who they were. They could no longer read their own commandments. They could no longer remember their own history. Their minds did not just surrender to control. They surrendered to irrelevance. The third consequence, and perhaps the most insidious, is the loss of authenticity. When you do not think critically, you do not think for yourself. When you do not think for yourself, your words are not truly your words. Your beliefs are not truly your beliefs. You become a hollow vessel, speaking the language of the collective, performing the role society has written for you. The philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti warned that it is no measure of health to be well-adjusted to a profoundly sick society. Yet we celebrate adjustment. We reward conformity. We punish deviation. And in doing so, we systematically strip people of their capacity for authenticity. But the consequences extend far beyond the individual. They metastasize into the social body. When millions of people stop thinking critically, societies become vulnerable to catastrophic errors of judgment. History is littered with the corpses of civilizations that could not course-correct because they had lost the capacity for honest self-examination. They repeated the same failing patterns, defended the same toxic systems, and accelerated toward their own collapse, all because critical thinking had been replaced with ideological certainty. We see this now. Political systems that cannot self-correct. Economic systems that perpetuate obvious inequities because the beneficiaries have lost the capacity, or more accurately, the will to question their advantage. Educational institutions that teach obedience instead of curiosity. Media ecosystems that manufacture consensus instead of illuminating truth. And perhaps most troublingly, we see entire populations that have internalized this surrender so completely that they police their own thoughts before anyone else needs to. The consequence of lost critical thinking is not just individual intellectual decay, it is collective paralysis. It is a civilization slowly suffocating under the weight of its own unexamined assumptions. The animals on the farm did not lose their physical freedom overnight. They lost their mental freedom first. And once the mind surrenders, the body follows inevitably. The machinery of control does not need violence when it has already colonized consciousness itself. This is the invisible trap. The more comfortable you become in your intellectual prison, the more you forget it is a prison at all. And that forgetting is precisely what the architects of control rely upon. But here is what the architects of control do not want you to know. The prison has no locks. The chains exist only because you have agreed to wear them. And the moment you withdraw that agreement, the entire machinery loses its power over you. This is not metaphorical liberation. This is concrete, tangible, neurological transformation. The brain is not fixed. It is plastic. Neuroplasticity is not just a theory, it is a documented biological reality. Every time you pause before reacting, Every time you question instead of accepting, every time you choose reflection over opinion, you are literally rewiring your neural pathways. You are building new connections, strengthening dormant capacities, reclaiming terrain that was surrendered to autopilot. The first act of rebellion is deceptively simple: awareness. Not awareness of external systems, though that matters, but awareness of your own mind. The moment you recognize that a thought may not be truly yours, that an emotion may have been triggered deliberately, that a belief may have been implanted rather than discovered, you have already begun to break free. Because awareness creates distance, and distance creates choice. This is why George Orwell understood that critical thinking is not merely an intellectual discipline. It is a moral act. It is the decision to see, to question, to remain awake even when sleep feels infinitely more comfortable. In 1984, Orwell showed us that the final victory of totalitarianism is not when people are forced to obey. It is when people freely choose to obey because they have forgotten any alternative exists. The antidote to that amnesia is relentless, uncomfortable consciousness. The second act is the cultivation of solitude, not isolation solitude. The sacred space where thought can breathe without the constant bombardment of external noise. In a world of endless notifications, algorithmic curation, and manufactured outrage, silence has become the rarest commodity. Yet it is in silence that your own voice reemerges. Nature called it the loneliness of the thinker, that sacred space where one confronts chaos and complexity without distraction. When you give yourself that silence, you reclaim your attention, and attention is the currency of consciousness itself. The third act is the resurrection of curiosity. Children are born as philosophers, endlessly questioning, but education systems, media structures, and social expectations systematically train us to replace curiosity with certainty. Yet the moment you stop asking why, your mind begins to age. Curiosity is the antidote to manipulation. When you ask why, you break the spell of passive belief. When you continue asking why layer after layer, you reach the root, the hidden motives, the concealed agendas, the mechanisms that shape reality around you. But here is the crucial insight. Awareness without action is merely another form of paralysis. The donkey Benjamin in Animal Farm saw through the pig's deceptions clearly. He understood the corruption, but he remained silent, and his silence changed nothing. Orwell leaves him as a tragic reminder that consciousness without courage is incomplete. To think critically is not just to understand, it is to act upon understanding. It is to speak truth even when silence is safer, to question even when conformity is rewarded, to risk being misunderstood for the sake of clarity. This is the path every great thinker has walked. Socrates drank hemlock for it. Galileo faced the Inquisition for it. Orwell himself sacrificed his health for it. They paid the price because they understood something profound, that a life lived in intellectual servitude is not a life at all. It is a slow extinction masquerading as safety. The rebellion then begins internally. It begins when you decide that your own mind is worth reclaiming, that your own voice is worth hearing, that your own truth is worth defending, even if no one else stands beside you. And, paradoxically, it is that very courage, that willingness to stand alone, that creates the conditions for others to awaken as well. There arrives a moment in every genuine awakening when everything you thought you understood suddenly crystallizes into a single, shattering insight. This is that moment, and what you are about to understand will reframe everything that came before it. The great question we began with was, why doesn't modern society think critically anymore? We explored the psychological roots. We examined the linguistic corruption. We traced the invisible mechanisms of control. We revealed the unseen consequences. We even showed the path to liberation. But all of this has been prologue to the truth that makes everything else coherent. Here it is. The system does not need to force you to stop thinking critically. It simply needs to make you believe that you are already thinking critically. This is the ultimate inversion. This is the final trick. This is the mechanism so perfectly disguised that it operates in plain sight, celebrated and encouraged by the very people it enslaves. Modern society has not eliminated critical thinking. It has democratized a counterfeit version of it. It has created the illusion of critical thought while systematically destroying the conditions for genuine thought to exist. You are encouraged to question, but only within approved boundaries. You are told to think differently, but only in ways that still serve the system. You are celebrated as a rebel, as long as your rebellion is profitable, shareable, and ultimately harmless. The animals on the farm experienced something similar. They were told they were free. They were told they were thinking. They participated in the governance of the farm. They had voice and agency, the illusion of it at least. And because they believed they were free, they did not recognize their enslavement. The tragedy was not that they were oppressed. The tragedy was that they no longer recognized oppression when they experienced it. This is the condition we now inhabit. We live in the age of pseudocriticism. We screenshot arguments we disagree with. We share hot takes on complex geopolitical situations we barely understand. We curate our outrage carefully for maximum engagement. We perform critique as a form of identity, a brand, a social currency. And in this performance, we mistake activity for thought, reaction for reflection, noise for signal. The philosopher Michel Foucault revealed something prophetic. True power does not suppress freedom. It produces freedom, the illusion of freedom, the simulacrum of autonomy. We are free to consume any product, support any cause, express any opinion, as long as we remain within the architecture that defines what free means. We are liberated consumers in a carefully constructed marketplace of ideas, where even our rebellions are commodified and fed back to us as entertainment. This is why the most dangerous person to any system of control is not the loud revolutionary. It is the quiet person who has reclaimed their own mind, not dramatically, not performatively, simply, privately, rigorously. The person who asks questions not for likes or engagement, but for truth. The person who sits with discomfort long enough to hear what it is trying to teach. The person who can hold two opposing ideas simultaneously and resist the urge to resolve them into comfortable certainty. This person terrifies systems of control because they cannot be predicted, managed, or manipulated. Because here is what the architects of control understand, even if they cannot articulate it. Authentic critical thinking is not a skill that can be taught in universities or downloaded as a course. It is a discipline of consciousness. It is a commitment to truth that supersedes comfort, belonging, identity, and safety. It requires what Søren Kierkegaard called the sickness unto death, the willingness to stand at the edge of the abyss, to face the dizziness of infinite complexity, to live with questions rather than retreat into answers. Most people will never do this, and that is not a judgment. It is simply an acknowledgement of what it costs. Because the moment you genuinely think critically, not as performance, but as lived reality, you can never again be entirely comfortable in society. You see too much. You understand too much about how the machinery operates. You recognize the manipulation in the language. You see the fear beneath the certainty. You understand that most people around you are not thinking, but performing the appearance of thinking. And that knowledge is both liberation and exile. But here is the paradox that completes the circle. This very exile, this very discomfort, this very refusal to be satisfied with comfortable illusions, this is the seed of genuine freedom. Not freedom from external constraint, though that may follow, but freedom of mind. The kind of freedom that no system can penetrate, no algorithm can manipulate, no ideology can colonize. It is the freedom that exists in the space between stimulus and response, in the gap where consciousness dwells. Orwell's final message, when you strip away the politics, is profoundly spiritual. He is telling us that the real battlefield of freedom is not in governments or institutions or even in the external world. It is in the human mind. Each mind is a frontier. Each moment of choosing awareness over autopilot is a small revolution. Each time you question instead of accept, you plant a seed. And those seeds, multiplied across millions of minds, can transform the world more powerfully than any violent uprising ever could. The animals at the end of Animal Farm stand at the window, looking through at the pigs and humans indistinguishable from one another. They have lost. The revolution is complete, but, and this is crucial, they can still see. They can still recognize what has happened, and in that recognition, something remains undefeated. Some spark of consciousness persists, even in defeat. That is not despair. That is the promise. Orwell is telling us that as long as one mind remains capable of seeing the truth, as long as one voice continues to ask questions, as long as one person refuses to accept the comfortable lie, the possibility of awakening persists. So the ultimate truth is this: critical thinking has not died in modern society. It has been buried. But buried things can be exhumed. The capacity for genuine thought is not lost. It is dormant, waiting for the moment when you decide that your own mind is worth reclaiming. And that decision, made in the privacy of your own consciousness, is the most radical act available to you. Freedom is the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. That freedom begins inside you. It will cost you something. It will demand your courage. It will require you to stand apart, to question loudly, sometimes to walk alone, but on the other side of that cost lies something worth everything. A mind that is truly, authentically, irreducibly your own. The question is not whether you can afford to think critically. The question is whether you can afford not to.